for Kyler Murray, but according to his agent, Scott Boras, it looks like his Major League Baseball contract that he signed that included nearly a $5 million signing bonus was put together in a way that let him play football through the end of his collegiate eligibility, but there was really no talk in there about being able to play for the NFL. So it almost seems like he might be hamstrung by the contract that he took at that moment. But let's say that wasn't there, Eric, that he actually had the decision that he could make, that he could jump into the NFL draft or he could go the Major League Baseball route. What do you think would be the better career choice for him?
Yeah, that's tough. Again, Major League Baseball is at a point where if you want to be a superstar, other than a couple of names, there's just not that many household names. And I don't know that Kyler Murray goes to the Oakland Athletics or some other team in Major League Baseball and becomes a household name. He might become a very good player, but I don't know that rises his stock in terms of endorsements and just being a famous athlete. I think if he gets drafted in the NFL, he becomes a commodity. He becomes someone that people know about, and then they're going to have their eye on him. Does another Heisman winner succeed in the NFL or not? Especially one from Oklahoma. We've seen White not do so well. We've seen Bradford go in and out of success or not success, to however you want to define Bradford's career. I know how I define it. Then you have Baker Mayfield doing what he does, and I think that's going to be their best shot at having someone who succeeds. But now you've got another Oklahoma quarterback going into the NFL possibly and trying to make a name for a Heisman winner in the NFL. I think if he wants to be a famous athlete, he needs to go to the NFL. But I think if he wants to have a long, healthy career in athletics, he should probably go to Major League Baseball.
Yeah, it'd be nice to have the decision to just pick which professional sports you want to pursue. The NFL route, he's not that prototypical size. He doesn't have that, but he does have that sort of style that you see in a guy a little bit like Mahomes. Murray's just more of a runner than Mahomes, but those mobile quarterbacks that can just press you and they put pressure on a defense because they can get outside of the pocket and they can still make throws down the field and on the run. They just have that dual threat ability where they're not just limited to being a runner and you just say, okay, then we're going to take that away and we're going to force you to pass. You don't want to do that with Kyler Murray. But you're right. With Major League Baseball, you can get stuck in the minor league system. If you don't perform, if you go through a slump, sometimes you wonder about the patience. Now, it does seem like being a guy that was drafted into the top 10, it does seem like he has undeniable talent when it comes to baseball. But again, though, you can get stuck in years of arbitration, and Major League Baseball is just not simple where he goes in, plays really well, and he's going to get $100 million. It's not really that simple. So, yeah, I think you're right. When you start to look at his chance for fame, and a chance to really be a name and a guy that if he does play well in the NFL, he's going to get paid a king's ransom in terms of the quarterback position. But you also run the injury risk. And a guy that's smaller and you start to think about concussions and some of the injuries that come with the NFL, definitely Major League Baseball would be the safer route. It just could be tougher sledding if you do get caught in AAA ball or wherever the Oakland A's feel like they're going to start him at. But it would be nice to come out of college and decide, well, do I want to go be a player in the National Football League or do I want to go pursue a career with Major League Baseball? That would be a nice problem to have.
Yeah, there's only been a few guys that have had that problem, and Eric Nesbit is not one of them.
Well, maybe I could throw in like PGA star.
Yeah.
You could get closer to that, right?
I was a lot closer to looking down that avenue than I ever was in something that required me to have, be able to run fast or be tough or, I think I wrestled in 7th grade and I lasted one season in that. I didn't enjoy that at all. Then I went out for basketball again in 8th and 9th grade. Didn't make the cut as far as getting on to the JV team. I was just at that point way too small. And if you're small, you got to be fast and shoot well. And I couldn't. I can shoot well now, but I'm still not fast. So basketball wasn't going to happen. And football, again, same problem. Not fast, too small. Yeah, golf was my thing, and that's about as close as I got.
Well, I would say I guess you're not a candidate for the NBA, but there is one team that might be able to use your services if you could still shoot the basketball, and that's the Houston Rockets. Eric, they are struggling badly. It doesn't even feel possible that a team that played as well as the Houston Rockets, they were the number 1 seed in the Western Conference last year. They make some changes to the roster. We've touched on the Carmelo Anthony situation, but he's gone. He's not there, and this Rockets team still struggling badly. Eric Gordon described the situation as it is just no fun right now for this team. They're in the bottom of the Western Conference, 14th place and floundering over their last 10 games. Is it possible that a 65-win number one seed from last year in the Western Conference could actually miss the playoffs this year?
Yes, it actually is possible, and it's hard to believe, but we're now a little over a quarter way through the NBA season. The Western Conference, as we've talked about over the past couple of weeks, is really packed tightly together. You've got those Los Angeles Lakers that, of course, I follow, not because I'm a Lakers fan, but be a LeBron James fan. They're only a game and a half back, and they're in fifth place. But the Houston Rockets are second to last, just in front of the Phoenix Suns. They're already 6 games out. They are just not looking good at all. They're 3 games under 500. You've already had the Carmelo Anthony fiasco. You've already got regrets about players long gone like Ariza. You just have a situation where the team seems to have lost their identity. And their identity was always a risky proposition. Remember how many times they shot the ball from three-point land or shot in isolation last year. And that's all well and good when you're draining them. When you're not draining them and things aren't going well and you play terrible defensively, you're going to lose a lot of ball games. Remember, Justin, when we were growing up, it was always these teams like Princeton that would come in and be shockers in the NCAA March Madness bracket because they could come in and just fire off three-pointers all night long. And if they made a bunch of them, they were a scary team and they could provide an upset in the bracket. The Houston Rockets made their fame last year in much the same way. They would blow teams out with a whole lot of points with a barrage of three-pointers. Again, when those balls aren't going through the hoop, it's tough to win basketball games. I don't know if this team has the right recipe, Justin. I really don't. We've always talked about their lack of defense. Now you've got a team that just has a confidence issue where they're even probably thinking the same question you just asked. Could a 65-win team really be this bad this year? And when that starts creeping in, they might even start to believe it like, wow, we had our chance last year and now we're just not the same.
The only thing that's saving them is what we talked about last week at the very end of the podcast when we talked about the Western Conference, how tightly compacted it is from really 13th, 14th place all the way to the first seed, that there's really only 5 to 6 games as things shake out on a nightly basis with those teams that separate them. So they're not that far out where they just need to get on sort of a winning streak. They just need to get 2, 3 in a row just to sort of get themselves right and get back on track. But it's amazing just how differently this team plays this year now that Trevor Ariza is gone. And you wouldn't think that losing Trevor Ariza would be that detrimental to your team. But defensively, he just gave them a stopper. He gave them a guy that could go out and shut down or at least slow down the best wing scorer every single night on the opposing team. Then behind him, you had Luke Baamute that could soak up some minutes as well. That was another just hustle guy. Play defense, get loose balls, get rebounds. You're not running plays for him. He's a screen setter. He's doing all those things. And now you take both those guys off this roster, and early in the year, you're putting Carmelo Anthony out there, and we know that he's not a defensive player. Harden is a defensive liability. You only have Capella as a rim protector. And at this point in Chris Paul's career, he's not really that great of an on-ball defender for an entire game. He can give you some possessions where he's a good defender, but he's not going to do it over the course of 82 games in the regular season every single minute he's out there. Nor is in the playoffs is he going to be able to play with that type of intensity. And we saw last year that his hamstring gave out on him late in that Warriors series. So they're not that far out. They better thank God for the Eastern Conference because they're 6-3 versus them. They're only 5-11 versus the Western Conference. So they're lucky that they've got 9 games versus the Eastern Conference so far. They could even be in worse shape. But I think it's just this team. They've had a lot of issues. Harden was out for 2 weeks or so with an injury. You had the Chris Paul suspension. Then he had some injuries. They keep messing around with their lineup and tinkering with it. It just seems like they need to get everybody healthy. But Eric, if they go through a stretch where Chris Paul would get hurt or Harden would get hurt and they would have to miss, one of those injuries where you're out for 3, 4, 6 week type thing, they could go on a stretch where they could lose enough where they would fall into a position where they'd need 4 or 5 teams to really bail them out. And when you look at the Western Conference this year, I just don't see that happening. When teams do that, if teams go on those stretches where they're just really bad for 10, 12, 15 games, that might cost them a chance to get to the playoffs for the Western Conference. There's just so many good teams in there. They're going to thump the East every time they play them, and they're going to rack up their wins, and they're going to just beat each other up. And if you don't capitalize on that and you don't go into your Eastern Conference games and get those wins, it could be a long road for the Rockets. So do I think they'll miss the playoffs? I think they can put it together and sneak in there as the 8th or the 7th seed. But if they get an injury, Eric, I think they are in big, big trouble, especially if it's to Chris Paul or Harden or Capella. If one of those three go down, I think they're in big, big trouble.
Yeah, I can't disagree with you at all. I mean, you look at the middle of the conference in the West, the LA Clippers and the Los Angeles Lakers, they're 16-9 and 16-10 respectively, several games over 500. When you look at the Rockets being several games under 500, what I'm really equating that to is that they're pretty far out just from the middle of the Western Conference playoff picture. And as you said, they go and lose a bunch of games, they're going to be out of it really quickly because Memphis, Portland, even Denver, Oklahoma City, they're all playing tough right now. I just don't see them making up a whole lot of ground. It could be game over by February for this Rockets team. That's crazy.
It is. And you even look at a team like the Lakers that are kind of stuck right now in the middle of the playoff picture, and they're only 2 games out of the lead, the number 1 seed, but they're also only 3 games out of falling completely out of the playoffs. That's how tight the Western Conference is right now. And you would think, Eric, with having so many teams now in the mix for this and a lot of different teams that have jumped into the playoff picture, and it's not just the big names that you think about. You've got Milwaukee, you've got Oklahoma City, you've got Denver. You mentioned the Clippers. The Pacers are in the top 5 in the East right now, along with your heavy hitters in your Bostons and Philly and your Golden State and your LA. You've got a lot of teams right now that are in the mix, but the NBA ratings are still down. TNT's reported they're down about 26%. ESPN's down about 6%. So let me ask you, Eric, some of the talk has been that the rating decline is due to the fact that LeBron James has left the Eastern Conference, where you always seem to have the Cavaliers in that early slot, that 7:30, 8 o'clock game that was in national prime time on an ESPN or a TNT. Now LeBron has gone out west, where those games are coming on at sometimes 10:30, 10:45, 11 o'clock here on the East Coast, and people just aren't staying up to watch the games. That's one thought. But another thought is this is a trickle-down effect of what has happened with the NBA, in the fact that it always feels like, well, it's a foregone conclusion the Golden State Warriors are going to find themselves in the NBA Finals. In the years past, it was versus the Cavaliers. Now it seems to be a little bit of question in the East. But do you feel the ratings decline as a result of the LeBron factor? Or do you feel like fans just really aren't going to get involved in the NBA until they get to the playoff time and they can actually start to see some of these top-tier teams play each other and see who shakes out in the East, for example, to go play a team like the Warriors?
I'm very confused by this. I'm not going to lie, because I remember a year ago on this podcast, we talked about the fact that the Cavaliers and the Warriors were so dominant, even the Rockets to some degree, were so dominant last year that we felt like that was really hurting the league, because everybody knew the regular season didn't matter and you get to the playoffs and it was going to be a foregone conclusion that you were more than likely going to see the Cavaliers, potentially the Celtics, against the Rockets or the Warriors. We felt like those 4 teams were really the only ones that mattered in the entire NBA, and we felt like that would hurt the value of the regular season. Now we get the inverse of that, where we're getting really tight matchups all the way up and down the conference. You're watching those Boston Celtics who have Gordon Hayward back. They've got all the pieces there, and they're fighting their way up the division in the East right now, because you've got teams like the Pacers and the Bucks and the Raptors, and of course our 76ers that we root for, the Pistons, others that are giving a charge to that Eastern Conference. Even the Hornets and the Magic are currently above the playoff cut line in the East. And I'm confused by the fact that now you have markets spread all over the United States with a legitimate chance to be a playoff contender, and now the ratings are down? I don't get that. The same thing in the West. Oklahoma City's good again. Denver Nuggets, the Clippers, but then you've got those Grizzlies, the Trailblazers, even the Mavericks now are above the playoff cut line, but it's so tight there that you're still talking about the Sacramento Kings, the Pelicans with Anthony Davis, you've got the Timberwolves, even people have their eye on the Jazz with their young stars, and then the Rockets. There's a lot to keep an eye on. It's very confusing to me that the regular season ratings are down. I'm hoping that at least we have maybe the fact that the NFL is still in play, and maybe after the February All-Star break in the NBA, we can kind of reassess the situation. But if these conferences are still this tight come February and March, and the ratings are still down like this, I'm very shocked and very confused by that, because personally, I think the action in the NBA is really good right now if you're a basketball fan. There are a lot of games that are very close, highly contested, and you don't necessarily know the outcome. You can actually sit there and root for your favorite team for all 4 quarters because you don't know what's going to happen. The 76ers play really well, and I love it, but they're given tough games almost every time I watch them. The same thing with the Warriors.